Paradise Hills is a residential neighborhood in southeast San Diego, tucked away in the canyons just inland of National City. In the 1980s, it was growing fast, with lots of Latino, Asian, and Black families moving in. Back then, June, Ron, and Romali grew up together in Paradise Hills going to family parties. They'd known each other their whole lives. As they were becoming teenagers, they were getting to that age where you had to choose an identity, or the way things were changing in their neighborhood, pick a side.
There was like this constant pressure of like, which gang are you going to join? You know what I mean?
You were either excelled at academics or you excelled at sports. And then the other option was you join a gang.
And for me personally, it felt like, well, if I join the red team, then that means I'm going to have to kind of put down like the homies on the blue team, which is not cool because like, you know, we had classes together and we had some cool adventures together growing up.
But something new was happening that they thought could unite the splintering neighborhood.
And then graffiti and hip-hop started coming onto the scene. Just seeing something that's on a wall, like out on the street, just all the colors, all the characters on there. I think that gave it that like, whoa, what is this?
Yeah, so we did a little nosedive into the art scene, and it was pretty well respected back then on both sides of the neighborhood, like blue team or the red team. They kind of looked at us like, oh, these guys are the artists, you know? We pretty much carved our own lane, if you think about it.
They formed a crew, not a gang with rivals, just a group of kids who wanted to do art on the big stage on a wall everyone could see. Their canvas was a wall on Division Street, a busy road in the heart of the neighborhood. It was on private property, so they knocked on the owner's door and asked permission.
We typed up a contract and went to him to get it signed. So if the cops came through, we just show him the contract and like, hey, we got permission to paint the wall.
And back then, we typed up the contract. We didn't just use Microsoft Word. You know what I'm saying? We used a typewriter.
And they also got permission from an artist a couple years older than them, Romy, who'd painted the wall before. This was around the time of the Gulf War, and these kids were tackling big themes.
He pretty much documented what was going on at the time and the irony of being on Division Street between like the neighborhood gangs as well as like in the Middle East.
And he gave us the blessing, and we went over there and painted our first one to kind of pay homage to his piece, Apocalypse. We originally painted Revelation, right? Kind of on the same theme. When I look back on that piece right now, it was very subpar. The skills are subpar, but it
wasn't timeless. It wasn't timeless.
It was, but it was a thrill. It was a thrill to say, all right, finally, hey, we got something up.
The crew was in business. They had a wall, they had a purpose, and they weren't in a gang. But behind the scenes, there was an elaborate operation in the works to take them down. And when they were least expecting it, it came to June's front door.
I open it up and it's the police, and I'm like, oh. They come in, they take everything, they take my old pictures, my old yearbooks, anything that was tagged on. And on their way out, they turn around, they're like, oh yeah, we also got a warrant for your arrest.
This is a story about 3 friends, second-generation Filipino immigrants, and a tight-knit community living through America's crime epidemic and the policing strategies that came with it. It's about how you can be punished for staying out of trouble, but also how you can come back, pick up the pieces, and paint again. From KPBS Public Media, this is The Finest, a podcast about the people, art, and movements redefining culture in San Diego. I'm Julia Dixon Evans. We heard about the Paradise Hills mural from our KPBS colleague, Corey Suzuki.
These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.
Wrote about how 3 old friends, Ron, Romali, and June, reunited to paint a mural on their old wall. And we'll get to that later. But the story of what these friends had been through together before that was so surprising and powerful that we just had to know more. So we invited them to our studio to get into the saga in more detail. Now, in their 40s and 50s, they're a funny crew with the chemistry you only get with decades of friendship.
We were like artistic jocks.
I think we were the original, parkour. Yeah, climbing freeway bridges and buildings and whatnot. It's like, dude, that's parkour. You get a varsity letter for that one. My name is Isauro Inocencio Jr. I go by Iz at work. Good friends call me June. You can call me June. I work as an elementary school teacher, 2nd grade, at the Chula Vista Elementary School District.
My name is Romali Licudan. I'm a tattoo artist, and I paint murals too. I live in Paradise Hills.
My name is Ron Recaido. Grew up in Paradise Hills. Currently reside in Paradise Hills. Active duty in the U.S. Navy. And supposed to say that all the opinions stated here are my own and not a reflection of the U.S. Navy.
Ron, June, and Romali's bond and the roots of their neighborhood trace back to the other side of the world, and it has a lot to do with the United States Navy.
Our parents are immigrants from the Philippines, and they're actually all from the same town.
Before World War II, the Philippines was a U.S. colony, and during the war, soldiers from both places fought side by side against Japan. After their victory, the U.S. granted the Philippines its independence, but they made a unique arrangement, the Military Bases Agreement of 1947. The U.S. could have military bases in the country, and Filipinos could join the U.S. Navy. While U.S. military presence abroad has its complications, it was, for some, a chance at the American dream. But competition for those jobs was fierce. As many as 100,000 Filipinos applied each year, but only about 400 got in.
And so our parents just so happened to be one of the lucky ones to get into the Navy. And when they got stationed, they all ended up in San Diego. And during the 80s, there was an older part of Paradise Hills, and they started a new development, which was around the time that our father started making rank and were able to afford the homes. And it was a whole brand new neighborhood. Fathers in the military, kids everywhere. Junior's dad is my godfather. Romali's sister is my mom's goddaughter, and so on and so forth. And they would have family parties, just all the immigrant Filipinos that all lived in the neighborhoods. And Filipino parties are just ridiculous with the amount of people they invite to the house and the amount of food that they have there. And that's how we grew up. We just grew up with each other.
And in between family parties and playing outside, the boys were enamored with the art that would inspire their graffiti future.
Comic books. Comic books was a major influence too.
X-Men, for sure.
We watched a lot of cartoons like Robotech.
And Robotech, the animation style was different, being that it was Japanese. Our fathers being in the Navy, it was a cartoon about a intergalactic space navy. So when everybody talks about anime today and are super into anime, I was like, man, you guys don't know anime. You guys don't know Robotech.
I think back in the days, along with Romali, but Ron would kind of school me on how to draw. And we both had comic books back in the 80s. We check out the comic convention before it was the comic convention.
Pretty much just carried a book around with me, and I'd even be drawing on my like notes in class. And I just love drawing.
When I think on it, I was like, why is it that all three of us whose, parents came from farmland, working in the farms in a very like rural part of the Philippines, come out here and just have some kids that are artistic? I think the Navy created a stable enough life to where their kids had they didn't have to worry about their next meal, so they had the opportunity to be creative or to be expressive, because we're kind of like Navy brats,
And I think like, we'll say for me, like my mom, she's an artist, but because during the time when she was young, her dad had told her that, there's no money to be made in art in the Philippines. So she studied to become a doctor. And because of that, I think she's living vicariously through me and would push me to do my art and be creative.
When I look back on it, it was like our parents had brought us here to create a better life, which they did. But it just so happened that they landed on the 80s and the 90s.
The boys' shared childhood was happy and filled with creative wonder. But as the 80s turned to the 90s and the boys started high school, Paradise Hills started to change, like many communities throughout the U.S. The seeds of this change stretch back decades. In 1935, the area was designated as a red-lined neighborhood. Redlining was a discriminatory practice in real estate and housing where mortgages and other loans were denied based on the race or ethnicity of a given neighborhood, generally communities of color like Paradise Hills. Redlining is no longer a legal practice, but its ongoing impacts are severe, like poverty and inadequate funding for schools and services. That built-up pressure came to a head during the so-called crack epidemic and Reagan's war on drugs. There were lots of drug dealers and guns, and police aggressively targeting redlined areas. San Diego's violent crime rate hit its all-time high in 1992 at 10 incidents per 1,000 residents. And Southeast San Diego specifically had higher crime rates and a reputation for gang activity. For kids growing up in that turbulent environment, gangs offered protection, self-worth, and identity.
And then when graffiti and hip-hop started coming onto the scene, that became the avenue to go if you didn't want to get into a gang or if you weren't good at sports. Like NWA, Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, stuff like that.
Like hip-hop was there to help us express ourselves like creatively, and we could still battle somebody or express our aggression, but not to where we're hurting each other.
Graffiti, along with DJing, rapping, and breakdancing, were the 4 founding pillars of hip-hop culture. It emerged in the 1970s in the Bronx. It was all about expression and having a voice. And in Ron, Romali, and June's day, San Diego had some of the best street art in the world.
San Diego had the front runners at the time. These guys were doing things that you had never seen before. You take something that they did in the 90s, and it's classic. It's timeless.
So when they saw some pieces in the neighborhood, they jumped at the chance to put their cartoon drawing skills on display for the whole town.
It was a rush. It was a rush because you put something up knowing that everyone's going to see it. You don't know how they're going to respond to it. Like it is kind of like art. You're trying to put forth a message.
And even if the piece would be washed away or painted over, it was still a chance to make a mark.
I feel like it kind of gave you a voice, you know what I mean? Like, even if it isn't, like, going to be permanent, like, someone seeing that and it leaving a stain on their brain is just as permanent as a wall being up for, like, years, you know?
The tag itself might be gone, but the memories remain.
That's right.
I'm younger than them, so when these guys were painting the wall in the beginning, I was that little grommet that was, because for me, like I would have to drive by that wall every morning to go to middle school. So when I was in middle school, I would always drive by the wall, see the pieces, or even see these guys painting it, and tell myself like one day I'm gonna paint that wall, you know. And then my favorite piece on that wall is a piece that these guys painted, which was the Lies and Cries piece. The techniques they were using were very advanced for the time being, you know.
Yeah, so like the first one, we blasted through it and got it up there. By the time that we painted that, like maybe a year or two later, we had been practicing and, you know, developing the craft, and there was a theme, there was like a color scheme, like, all right, we started getting the whole composition of the things. I think it was during the time when, you know, you were dating. So I was like, okay, put Lies and Cries and tell a story of like, there's a chick right here and, you know, she's having a tough time. She's on the phone, you know what I mean?
On the phone.
The concept, okay, pretty cool. But like Romali said, it was the technical execution. It was like hearing one of your favorite jazz musicians do something new with his instrument, you know?
They were mastering their craft and putting it up on their wall on Division Street for the whole neighborhood to see.
It was a good feeling. You know, it was almost like winning the Super Bowl. Nah, that's too much, huh? Let me tone it down a little bit. It was almost like winning like a CIF championship game in high school. You know what I mean? Like there were other like graffiti artists from different high schools at the time, and we had a chance to put our mark up and say, hey, you know, we're up.
Ron and June started to organize a whole graffiti crew, one that was about expression and craft and bringing people together.
I think back then, I was more on the tip of like, why don't we just unify everybody so there's like a north side of the crew and a south side of the crew and an east side of the crew, and we can just take over, you know what I mean? So it was almost like, I guess in my mind, it felt like everyone was trying to get in where they fit in, and I guess I kind of wanted it to be where, well, if you're down with art and, you know what I mean, you got a pretty sick style, then you get down with us.
Junior was like I don't know if you watched the movie Warriors, but he was like the Cyrus.
Can you dig it?
He got shot in the movie, but
I ducked in real life. Several times.
They were all painting together. Eventually, Romali was old enough to join the crew. But one fateful day, they stumbled upon what seemed like a golden opportunity.
They put a little ad out on some underground magazines back then that would talk about, hey, we're making a documentary on graffiti artists. We've been to San Francisco. We've been to L.A. We're going to do one in San Diego. You know, like being young and, you know, all about that. Getting up, we were like, oh, we represented like our neighborhood, we represented our schools, and we could get up here on the map. And I think that was the whole like Icarus story, you know what I mean? Where you kind of flew too close to the sun and it was just like, damn, it was a trap. Like in Star Wars, it was a trap. We ended up following through, showing up, displaying some artwork around the neighborhood. I think Ron even busted a little freebie mural for them.
Oh yeah, they invited us to their studio.
Yeah.
Romali happened to miss the documentary filming, which he would soon find out was a blessing in disguise.
I actually had to go on a family trip, so I kind of lucked out, and like, because around that time, that's when they were getting all these guys' information and like getting them on film.
The documentary crew turned out to be cops trying to bust graffiti artists. At this time, police were coming hard after gangs. There were new laws that characterized gangs as street terrorism and created gang injunctions, court orders that basically gave police expanded power to target suspected members in certain areas. The gang injunctions specifically mentioned graffiti as a signature gang activity. So it's no surprise that the cops saw going after graffiti as a way to combat gangs. Gangs tag, or write their names, sometimes in stylish lettering, to mark territory. Ron, Romali, and June were tagging too, but their focus was murals. It wasn't about turf, it was about artistic expression. But to the police, it was hard to tell the difference. In 1991, the LA County Sheriff's Department staged a fake graffiti TV show and arrested auditioners who showed off their pieces. The lead investigator behind the operation said, quote, "Most taggers are heavily involved with petty theft, and they go on to become the gangs." Soon after, police in San Diego launched a very similar operation here. And to them, it didn't seem to matter that Ron, June, and Romali's crew was not a gang at all, but an alternative to that life. The neighborhood started catching on to the operation, but it was too late for Ron and June.
Some other local crews were hitting everyone up like, hey, don't go, it's a trap.
They were like, hey, Star Productions is not who they say they are. Be on alert, they're undercover cops. And I was like, oh, man.
But after Ron and June met up with the fake documentary team, nothing happened for months. They figured they were off the hook and practically forgot about the whole thing. And at that time, tragedy struck the crew. Their friend and fellow graffiti artist was accidentally shot and killed.
When our friend TJ passed away, it was like a wake-up call. It was like, okay, all right, what are we doing? It was time to reflect. He was like a good kid. It was like, you wouldn't wish any bad on him, but it happened to this guy. He was a good dude. We went straight from his funeral. I remember his father giving a very powerful eulogy to speaking to all of us, like everybody that was there. I was like, oh, man.
It was raining, too.
Yeah, it was raining. It was...
He said something like, this is my only son. Like, that was one of the moments where I was like, wow.
He was basically like, look at what you're doing. What are you guys doing? And I was just like, man, let me try to sort it all out. But it was a crazy moment in time. And like I said, with that, just that raw energy, we drove straight from the funeral right up there. So it was just all that emotion through your fingertip as you just express what we were feeling on the wall. And that was just to pay tribute to our friend.
So Ron went up to Division Street to put up a memorial mural for TJ. But the cops they forgot about, they were springing into action at this very moment and coming for June.
My story after the funeral was a little different what had happened was after the funeral, everyone's kind of we're all dazed and confused. I go home and I get a knock on the door and I open it up and it's the police and I'm like, oh. And they come in, my mom's tripping out. She's like, oh, what's going on? I was like, oh, nothing. They just want to get some spray paint. And on their way out, they turn around. They're like, oh, yeah, we also got a warrant for your arrest. And I was like, what? And I look at my mom. She's like kind of getting all teary-eyed. And I'm like, oh, snap. And I look at the cop and I'm just like, can I get a jacket? Because it was cold. It was rainy that day. And I ended up going. But it was a trip because when they brought me to the station, they showed like some of the clips that they got of our crew. And they paused it right on TJ, like as the camera panned over, like the crew members like painting. They paused it right on TJ and they're just like, oh, we heard about what happened to your friend. And I was just like, dang, dude. I just remember, putting my head down, just thinking, man, like shaking my head. It's like, that's cold, man. Like, and they even made a comment, something like, oh, we were about to pick him up too. And I was like, dang. That was a lot to go through for teens. I can kind of relate to some of that post-traumatic stuff every now and then, It felt like the end of the world in that little world.
It was like an episode of The Dukes of Hazzard where Bo and Luke would be in the General Lee and they'd be going off a cliff and it'd pause and then the narrator would be like, oh, what if the Duke boys are gonna get out of this one? and then it's like there's no end in sight. But it was like that. It was just like, oh man, everything came to like a crescendo.
The sting operation ultimately arrested 37 people, allegedly responsible for causing $250,000 in damages to homes, businesses, and walls in the region. Ron said he wasn't arrested because his work was focused on the Division Street wall, which they had permission to paint on, but that June had painted on other walls around town. I wondered what they thought about how the sting was portrayed in the press at the time. I was just reading a news article it was in like the paper right afterwards. There are a couple things I want to read to you. So it was immediately following the sting, Susan Golding, the mayor, she was quoted in the Union Tribune calling graffiti low class. And then the district attorney, Ed Miller, said, tagging is a serious crime, not a harmless prank. Taggers do this to get attention. Now, law enforcement and the community have given taggers the kind of attention they deserve. How does that, hearing that now, how does that make you feel? What is your response?
I think they're right. They're right in the sense that the kids, the youth, they do need attention. They need positive outlets. And for many of the neighborhoods that are within the Red Line district, there's not many opportunities out there because their parents just don't make enough money. So do they need attention? Yeah, I think kids need a lot of attention. Had somebody reached out to us and be like, hey, look, you guys have some talent, some skill, don't use it all on defacing the city or something that'll get you busted. You can go work for Disney, or you could be an artist, you could paint in your garage. There's more positive ways, but we didn't have that type of mentorship. Mm-hmm. So yes, they're correct, I believe. Yeah, they're right. But the way they skew it.
If you go back to the history of graffiti too, it was born through poverty, in the Bronx. And these kids were in schools where they're being taught that they're not going to amount to nothing. And so that's where graffiti comes about, because it's allowing an adolescent or a teenager make his mark on the world by just writing his name on a wall, and letting people know that, hey, I'm here, I'm alive, I exist.
After his arrest, June had to do community service, and his dad took his spray paint away and told him no more art. And June took that seriously. Ron went off to college, where he found it hard to trust people and make friends. Romali, still in high school, kept up the wall for a while, but it faded out eventually. But slowly, art crept back into their lives. Romali had an art teacher in high school who became a mentor.
I was going to join the Navy because that's what my dad did. And so he pulled me off to the side, sat me down and told me, you have something with characters and a passion for art. You should do something with it because it's what you love to do. And so he convinced me to go to art school. So I went to Cal Arts to study animation, and I've been doing art ever since then.
He worked as a slot machine designer and in video games for a while, and today is a tattoo artist and muralist back in Paradise Hills. June kept his promise to his dad of no more art and became a teacher. But when a principal saw his graffiti arrest on his record, he suggested he teach art, which he did for a decade. Ron worked through some tough times and depression with some motivational books that changed his life, like The Art of Living Consciously. He found new purpose and joined the Navy. And as the years passed, they started families of their own, and the neighborhood changed, but people still remembered the crew for their Division Street murals.
People from the community who got their doctorates want to improve the community through art. And I think our names, just because we've been doing it for so long, came up. And so they reached out to us, and it was just all right, let's give it another go.
So last year, the guys got the band back together, ready to paint on Division Street again. This time, they wanted to tell the story of their community and create something that could be a positive influence on young people in Paradise Hills today. A few weeks before they came to the studio, Ron, Romali, and June showed their new mural to our KPBS colleague, Corey Suzuki.
I thought it was just a beautiful thing how everything worked out.
Romali being an artist, Ron being an artist, and myself, as well as the other artists who were involved, we all have different art styles. But to put them all into one wall, it's pretty challenging. And I think it came out beautiful.
The mural is bright orange with 3 distinct scenes. On the right are protesters holding signs and American, Filipino, and Mexican flags. It's a depiction of the Delano grape protests, when Mexican and Filipino workers in California came together to form the United Farm Workers. They went on strike to protest low pay and poor working conditions. And ultimately, it resulted in big change, improving pay and hours for farm workers.
We're trying to think of a message to give to the community. And while I was in school, I took Asian American studies, And from there is where I learned the role that the Filipinos played during the 1960s grape strike in Delano, and how Filipinos worked alongside Cesar Chavez to make that movement happen, And I felt that this piece of history would have been a good thing to know in this community, because when we were going to high school, like the Filipino, the Mexican community, or the Black community, we were at odds with each other sometimes, And if there was anything to teach us, it should have been about our history, to learn that our communities work together in a way to better their situation.
In the center of the mural are brilliant giant letters, gold and white, that say Isang Bagsak. It's Tagalog, a language widely spoken in the Philippines.
Isang Bagsak, it literally translates to one down, meaning if one person's down, everybody's down. And the Isang Bagsak was a saying that they used in the grape strike to kind of rally everybody.
And on the left side of the mural is another homage to their Filipino and agricultural roots, traditional vegetables. And there's cursive lettering above them that says, "Under God, indivisible."
Because the street is called Division Street, we thought, it's pretty witty, Under God, indivisible on Division Street. See what I'm saying? The vegetables that we painted here are staples of the Ilocano diet. We got the squash, we got the ampalaya, we got the eggplant, the kamatis, calamansi. They're all fruits and vegetables that Filipinos use in their cooking.
So these were all vegetables that I grew up eating, and here I am painting them now on this wall for the community.
And I think what's cool too is that with our parents growing a lot of these vegetables in our backyards, it also shows that them coming from a farming background, they were able to show us that, you get the fruits of your labor.
It was a group effort. June did the background and the protester signs, Ron the lettering, and Romali the vegetables and people. And at the end, they signed it with their old crew name, JVC. Corey asked them about that name.
JVC.
Can I ask, does that stand for something?
Well, JVC, we're back in the day when we were younger, it was the Juvenile Vandal Crew, right? I don't know what it stands for now. What is it?
It's transitioned and it's grown with us, so it's more of just a vigilant citizen.
If cops ever get hold of this footage, that's what it stands for. We're just vigilant citizens of the community.
From juvenile vandal crew to just vigilant citizens, these former targets of a police sting operation turned out all right.
I would drive past this wall and always see it blank and just reminisce about the times damn, we used to paint that wall, and always wishing that man, I wish we could paint that wall again, and then for us to come back here and do it, and now when I drive by it again, it's it brings joy to me, you know what I mean? And
Absolutely.
It's also we're not just putting up our names, because in graffiti, the basis of it is putting your name up, you know what I mean? But a lot of people don't realize that graffiti can also be used, or it should be used as a message board, to inspire, you know what I mean? And
Absolutely.
It's also we can show the younger generation, I guess, what they could do with graffiti and what they can do with their art.
Today, art is still a big part of each of their lives. Romali and June have done other murals, from the Philippines to San Francisco. Earlier this summer, Ron held an exhibit in Chula Vista that explored his Filipino family's U.S. Navy story through graffiti-inspired art. Ron, June, and Romali told us they learned a lot from doing graffiti, about practicing a skill tirelessly, learning to carve your own path, and eventually finding a voice.
We're told not to write on walls, and we're told not to do this or say that, but there's times when you do got to get up and you got to say what you need to say and go against the grain and go against, the norm of society to prove a point, and to make a statement,
A special thank you to Ron Recaido, Romali Licudan, and Isauro Inocencio Jr., aka June, for sharing their story with us. Thank you to KPBS South Bay and Imperial Valley reporter Corey Suzuki for all of his reporting on this story, and to Alan Manzano, who first pitched the story to KPBS during a recent event. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It really helps new listeners discover the show. And best of all, if you can think of anyone in your life that might like The Finest, please share it with them. We're off next week. We'll see you in 2 weeks. I'm your host, Julia Dixon Evans. Our producer, lead writer, and composer is Anthony Wallace. Our engineer is Ben Redlosk, and our editor is Chrissy Wynn.